My daughter-in-law called me at 11:47 p.m. to tell me my son was dead. The strange part? The police hadn't even found his car yet. She knew details about the accident that wouldn't be discovered until morning. When I asked how she knew so much, she hung up. That phone call changed everything, because it told me one thing for certain. Someone in my family was lying. And if you want to know what I discovered next, make sure you subscribe to my channel, because this story will shock you to your core. The phone rang while I was watching the late news, and Sarah's voice came through shaking with what sounded like grief. "Mom, I have terrible news," she whispered into the phone. "David's been in an accident. He's gone." I sat up straight in my recliner, remote falling to the floor. "What do you mean gone? What kind of accident?" "His car went off the road in Colorado. The snow was so heavy, and you know how those mountain roads can be. They found the car this morning at the bottom of a ravine. Something felt wrong immediately. David had been in Denver for a business conference, but he wasn't supposed to drive back until tomorrow." "When did this happen?" "Last night around midnight. The police said the weather was terrible, visibility was almost zero." I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "Sarah, if this happened last night, how do you know so many details? You said they found the car this morning." The line went quiet for several seconds. "The police called me first since I'm his emergency contact." "At what time?" Another pause. I don't remember exactly. I was so upset. After hanging up, I couldn't sleep. Something about Sarah's call bothered me beyond the obvious tragedy. She had mentioned specific details about the location, the weather conditions, even the exact time of the accident. But when I called the Colorado State Patrol the next morning, they told me David's car had just been located an hour ago. "Ma'am, we're still processing the scene," the officer explained. "The vehicle was discovered by a highway crew clearing snow from Route 285. We haven't released any details to family members yet." I called Sarah back immediately. "The police say they just found David's car. How did you know about it last night?" Her voice turned defensive. "I must have been confused about the timing. I was in shock, Mom. People don't think clearly when they get news like that. But I was thinking clearly, and what I was thinking scared me." The next morning, I drove to David's house. Sarah met me at the door wearing black clothes that looked freshly pressed, not like something grabbed in a moment of crisis. Her eyes were red, but I noticed she kept checking her phone while we talked. "The funeral home called," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "They want to discuss arrangements. I think we should keep it small, just family and close friends. David would have wanted something simple. We don't even know when they'll release the body. These things take time, but we should be prepared." I watched her carefully. In 15 years of marriage to my son, Sarah had never made a major decision without consulting him multiple times. Now she was planning his funeral with the efficiency of someone who had been thinking about it for a while. "What about the business?" I asked. David owned a successful consulting firm with 12 employees. "I've already called his lawyer about succession planning." Fortunately, David was very thorough about paperwork. He had documents prepared for situations like this. Documents prepared for his own death. At 34 years old. Over the next few days, I watched Sarah transform from grieving widow to business executive with remarkable speed. While I was posting missing person information online and calling search and rescue teams, she was meeting with lawyers and accountants. While I was driving to Colorado to speak with investigators personally, she was interviewing candidates for David's position. "We can't let the company fail because of personal tragedy," she explained when I questioned the timing. "David worked too hard building this business to let it collapse now." Her father, Robert, appeared on Tuesday with covered dishes and sympathy cards. He had always been polite but distant during family gatherings. Now he seemed genuinely concerned about Sarah's welfare and surprisingly knowledgeable about business transitions. "Elizabeth, I know this is difficult," he said while helping Sarah organize David's home office. "But practical matters can't wait. Sarah needs guidance through the legal process." I found him photographing documents when he thought I was in the kitchen. The memorial service was held at a small chapel downtown. Sarah wore an expensive black dress I had never seen before and cried beautifully into Robert's shoulder while I stood in my navy suit, watching the performance. About 40 people attended, mostly David's employees and a few family friends. "Such a young man," someone whispered behind me. "What a senseless tragedy." After the service, I helped clean up while Sarah and Robert huddled in the corner, discussing what they called transition strategies, in voices they thought were private. I caught fragments of their conversation about insurance policies and corporate succession plans. The following week, Sarah walked into the county courthouse with a briefcase full of paperwork. She filed for a presumptive death certificate and provided emergency succession documents that allegedly David had signed months earlier. Mr. Thompson was very thorough about business continuity planning. Their new lawyer explained when I asked questions. He wanted to ensure smooth operations in case of emergency. Funny how thorough my son had apparently been about his own death. The legal process moved with suspicious efficiency. Corporate bylaws mysteriously supported Sarah's temporary control of the company. Board members who might have objected received phone calls from Robert's business associates suggesting that cooperation would benefit everyone involved. Within a month, Sarah was officially interim president while a search for permanent leadership took place. The search was expected to take several years. At 63 years old, I realized I had become invisible to everyone involved in this process. They looked at me and saw a confused mother who would gratefully accept their help managing complicated legal matters. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Sarah gave interviews to local television stations, sitting in David's favorite chair, while Robert stood behind her providing silent support. She explained how she felt obligated to preserve David's vision for the company. David was passionate about helping small businesses succeed, she told the reporter, voice catching at precisely the right moments. I know he would want me to continue his work. His work. Apparently David's work now involved his wife assuming control within 72 hours of his presumptive death certificate. 3 days after we buried an empty coffin, I went to David's office to collect his personal belongings. I found Sarah and Robert in the conference room surrounded by enough legal documents to paper a small house. Elizabeth, Sarah jumped up, quickly organizing papers into neat stacks. I wasn't expecting you today. I wanted David's things, I said, scanning the documents. I could see insurance forms, corporate restructuring papers, and succession protocols. Unless you need his coffee mug for business purposes. Robert cleared his throat diplomatically. We're handling legal compliance issues. Very tedious administrative work. Tedious. Apparently hostile takeovers had been reclassified as paperwork management. The next day, I tried reasoning with Detective Morrison from the Colorado State Patrol. He demonstrated the classic combination of sympathy without usefulness. Mrs. Thompson, I understand your concerns, but there's no evidence of criminal activity. Sometimes people simply disappear, especially in severe weather conditions. And sometimes wives benefit remarkably well from convenient disappearances, I replied. He gave me the look that all police officers seem to learn in training, the one reserved for hysterical family members. I know this is difficult, but you need to trust our investigation. If circumstances change, we'll contact you immediately. If circumstances change. As if missing sons regularly send postcards from the afterlife. I left the police station and drove straight to David's office building. The parking lot buzzed with normal business activity, as if nothing catastrophic had occurred. Through the lobby windows, I could see Sarah in David's office, sitting in his chair like she belonged there. Mrs. Thompson. The receptionist looked surprised to see me. I'm so sorry for your loss. Are you here to see Mrs. Thompson? Mrs. Thompson. Apparently there were 2 of us now. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and walked halls where my son had spent 6 years building something meaningful. The walls displayed photos from company events and client celebrations. David appeared in most of them, smiling and confident and undeniably alive. The irony was suffocating. Here I stood, surrounded by evidence of my supposedly dead son, while his widow sat upstairs spending his life insurance money on new office furniture. Rebecca, David's assistant, found me in the break room staring at a motivational poster about persistence. Mrs. Thompson, I thought that was you. She hugged me with genuine sadness. I still can't believe he's gone. Neither can I said, meaning it more literally than she realized. Is there anything I can do? I saved his personal items in a box. Actually, there might be something. I lowered my voice. Have you noticed anything unusual since the accident? Rebecca glanced around nervously. Unusual how? Documents being moved, files being accessed, that sort of thing. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Kevin mentioned something about Mr. David's computer files being reorganized. Said it was strange because Sarah ordered it done immediately after the memorial service. Kevin, the young intern who noticed everything despite seeming distracted most of the time. What kind of files? Financial records, contracts, client databases, everything you'd need if you were. She stopped, looking uncomfortable. If you were taking over someone's position, I finished. Rebecca nodded grimly. Walking back to my car, I passed Sarah's new luxury sedan parked in the executive space that used to belong to David. I stood there for a moment, keys in hand, staring at that gleaming vehicle where my son's modest truck used to sit. My son had vanished in what looked like a perfect accident, and the beneficiaries were already measuring his office for new furniture. But every good story needs an unexpected twist, and I was just beginning to write mine. Playing the role of the grieving mother-in-law who needed guidance turned out to be easier than I expected. Apparently, tragedy makes people assume you're helpless. I started visiting Sarah's house regularly, bringing homemade meals and asking for help understanding the legal paperwork. I've been thinking, I said over coffee and carefully planned conversation, about how proud David would be seeing you take charge like this. Sarah gave me that practiced smile she had perfected for the news cameras. I just want to honor what he built. Honor. Nothing honors a man's legacy quite like erasing him from his own company. I spent 2 weeks perfecting the grateful mother-in-law routine, delivering casseroles, offering to help with administrative tasks, and listening to Sarah explain how she was learning the business while Robert provided family guidance. The performance was exhausting, but it gave me access to information I never would have gotten otherwise. Kevin seems very capable, I mentioned casually while helping Sarah organize David's home office. David always said he had real potential. Oh yes, Kevin's been invaluable during this transition. He's been going through David's files systematically, making sure everything is properly documented. Systematically going through files. Such a useful way to put it. That must be a lot of work. All those contracts and client records. You have no idea. There were so many loose ends. David wasn't always the most organized person. David, who color-coded his filing system and kept backup copies of everything. Disorganized. I nodded sympathetically while mentally recording every detail. Rebecca became my unexpected source of information, texting me observations that might prove important later. Sarah had Kevin copy all client account files to external drives, read one message. Claims she needs to review the entire portfolio. Another text arrived the next day. Robert spent 3 hours in David's office yesterday. Had access to the safe somehow. David's personal safe that supposedly only family knew the combination to. Within 3 weeks, I had enough small details to see a pattern forming. Robert's consulting business had mysteriously gained several new clients, all companies that had previously worked exclusively with David's firm. Sarah had quietly transferred major contracts to subsidiary companies that hadn't existed 3 months ago. Then came what Sarah called a company celebration. "Elizabeth, I'd love you to join us next Friday evening," Sarah said, her voice bright with artificial enthusiasm. "It's important for the staff to see the family moving forward together." Moving forward. Another phrase that appeared frequently in her vocabulary. What exactly are we celebrating? New partnerships, expanded services, the kind of growth David always envisioned. The kind of growth that apparently required his convenient absence. I accepted the invitation with enthusiasm, because that's exactly what they expected from a harmless widow who was grateful for their help managing complicated family matters. They were about to learn how badly they had misjudged Elizabeth Thompson. The evening before the party, I sat in my kitchen with a glass of wine and a legal pad covered in notes. Names, dates, connections, the foundation of something that was starting to look less like a tragic accident and more like calculated murder. Rebecca had confirmed that multiple stock transfers had been processed through shell companies with names I didn't recognize. Kevin had mentioned that some of David's computer files showed access logs dated after his supposed death. Robert's consulting contracts all seemed to involve clients who had previously worked exclusively with David's company. I finished my wine and looked at my reflection in the kitchen window. Tomorrow I would smile and nod and play the grateful family member while Sarah and Robert celebrated their success. But tonight, I was planning something different. Something that would remind them that underestimating Elizabeth Thompson was their first and potentially last mistake. I found the flash drive completely by accident, which is how most important discoveries happen. While packing David's home office, boxing books and papers that Sarah hadn't yet reorganized, I noticed one business textbook felt unusually heavy. The pages had been carefully cut to create a hiding space. Very cloak and dagger. Very David. He had always been paranoid about computer security and backup systems. The flash drive was small and unmarked, hidden inside what used to be a chapter on asset management. I brought it home and plugged it into my laptop with the nervous energy that comes with potentially finding either crucial evidence or a computer virus. What I discovered was worse than my darkest suspicions. The file contained a video dated 3 weeks before David's disappearance. He sat in his home office, the same room where I had found the drive. He looked exhausted and frightened. "Mom," he said, staring directly into the camera, "if you're watching this, it means they succeeded." My coffee went cold as I listened to my son explain how his wife and father-in-law had been using his business to wash money for what he called extremely dangerous people. "It started small," David continued, running his hands through his hair the way he had since childhood. "Consulting contracts that didn't make sense. Payments to companies that seemed to exist only on paper. Sarah said Robert was helping us expand our network." He looked completely drained as he described asking questions, Robert becoming defensive, Sarah taking phone calls in other rooms and acting like a stranger. "I traced some of the money, Mom. It connects to organizations that make the mafia look like a book club. When I told Sarah I was going to contact the FBI, He paused, took a deep breath. "She said I would regret that decision. That some secrets are too dangerous to expose." The video lasted 25 minutes. 25 minutes of my son explaining how the two people he trusted most had threatened to destroy him if he didn't cooperate. I tried to cancel the contract with something called Northwind Logistics. That's when things got really scary. Robert showed up at my office with 2 men who looked like they bench-pressed cars for fun. They said I was being reckless. Said smart people don't ask questions about certain business relationships. Northwind Logistics. I wrote the name down along with every other detail David mentioned. I'm recording this because I can't trust anyone anymore. Not the police. Robert claims he has contacts in law enforcement. Not our lawyers. They've been working with Robert for months. Only you, Mom. You're the only person who knew me before this nightmare started. Near the end, David's expression became more intense. I've created a kind of insurance policy, a back door into our computer systems that only I know about. If something happens to me, the access codes are hidden in my copy of Strategic Business Planning, the one with the torn spine. The system will stay dormant unless someone activates it with those codes. He paused, looking directly at the camera. I also gave Marcus Williams a sealed envelope to hold. He doesn't know what's inside, but he knows to give it to you if I disappear. It contains account numbers, contact information for 2 of Robert's associates who might be willing to talk, and locations where I've been copying financial records. This explained how Marcus, David's former college roommate, had called me asking strange questions about Northwind Logistics. If they kill me, make them pay for it, all of them. And Mom, don't trust anyone. Not until you're absolutely sure whose side they're on. I sat in my kitchen for over an hour after the video ended, staring at my laptop screen and processing what I had learned. My daughter-in-law wasn't just a greedy opportunist. She was part of something much larger and infinitely more dangerous. My son was either dead or hiding from people who specialized in making inconvenient problems disappear permanently. I poured myself a large glass of wine and started making lists. Names from the video, companies David had mentioned, dates that might prove significant. The memorial service suddenly made perfect sense. Sarah hadn't been grieving. She had been celebrating. The rapid assumption of David's death wasn't wishful thinking. It was the preferred outcome. I thought about all those sympathetic phone calls I had received, all those people offering support, while my daughter-in-law liquidated my son's life insurance and restructured his company according to her specifications. The flash drive felt warm in my hand as I removed it from the laptop. Such a small object to contain such devastating truth. I returned it to the hollowed textbook and placed both in my bedroom safe next to my will and David's birth certificate. Evidence for later, when I figured out what later was going to look like. For now, I had names to research and lies to uncover. The performance of grateful mother-in-law would continue, but now it served a purpose beyond simple information gathering. David had asked me to make them pay. I intended to honor that request with interest. The advantage of being an invisible 63-year-old woman is that people assume you don't understand complicated concepts like corporate fraud and money laundering. They're usually right, but I had spent 40 years married to a man who built his own business from nothing. I understood enough to follow the trail David had left behind. Northwind Logistics proved fascinating when I researched them. Officially, they were a shipping company based in Nevada. In reality, They operated as a financial cleaning service with a very selective client list. I spent 3 days at the public library using their computers to investigate the companies David had mentioned in his video. Amazing what you can discover when you know what to look for and have unlimited time. Cross-referencing contracts with incorporation dates told an interesting story. Most of David's company's new business partners had been created within weeks of each other, all sharing the same registered agent, all using addresses that turned out to be mailbox stores. The security guard David had mentioned was surprisingly easy to locate. Marcus Williams, 45 years old, fired from David's company 2 days after the disappearance for violations of company policy. No explanation, no severance package, just gone. I found his address through the phone book and drove to his apartment complex on the south side of town, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business. Marcus answered his door looking exactly like someone who had been fired for knowing too much. "Mr. Williams, I'm Elizabeth Thompson. I believe you knew my son, David." His face went through several expressions before settling on carefully neutral. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. David was a good guy." Was. Everyone spoke of him in past tense. I held out a plate of cookies. "I was hoping you might share some memories about his last few weeks at work." Marcus hesitated, glancing over my shoulder like he expected unwelcome company. "I don't know what I could tell you that you don't already know. You'd be surprised how little people tell the grieving mother." He let me in reluctantly, but kept checking the windows like he was expecting visitors. "David seemed stressed those last few weeks," he admitted, pouring coffee that could have stripped paint. "Working late, making a lot of phone calls, asking questions about security." "What kind of questions?" Marcus looked even more nervous. "About who had access to what, about whether our systems could be compromised from outside, about whether someone could monitor his communications." "What did you tell him?" "I told him what I knew, which wasn't much, but it was enough to make him worried." I sipped the terrible coffee and casually mentioned Northwind Logistics. Marcus went pale. "Where did you hear that name?" "David mentioned it once. Said something about canceling a contract with them." Marcus set down his coffee cup with hands that weren't entirely steady. "Mrs. Thompson, you seem like a nice lady. Take my advice and forget about Northwind. Forget about whatever David might have told you. Some things are better left alone." Interesting choice of words. He stood up abruptly. "I think you should go now." "Did they pay you to forget, Marcus, or just threaten you?" His silence was answer enough. I left the cookies and my phone number on his coffee table. "If you change your mind about talking, you know how to reach me." Walking back to my car, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there when I arrived. The driver was reading a newspaper in that obvious way people read newspapers when they're not actually reading. I drove home slowly, watching my mirrors. The sedan followed for 6 blocks before turning away, but the message was clear. Someone was keeping track of who asked questions about David Thompson. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with wine and a new understanding of Marcus's terrified reaction to Northwind Logistics. A man doesn't look that frightened over a simple shipping company. Whatever David had stumbled into was big enough to make grown men disappear and scary enough to make security guards afraid of their own shadows. I pulled out David's torn copy of Strategic Business Planning and found what he had hidden there. A piece of paper with a series of numbers and letters. Access codes. Looking at those codes, I realized David had given me more than evidence of their crimes. He had given me a way to watch them commit new ones. Rebecca called me at 7 in the morning, which meant either someone was dead or something was very wrong. In my experience, those possibilities weren't mutually exclusive. "Mrs. Thompson, you need to hear this," she whispered into the phone. "Someone accessed Mr. David's computer files last night." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What kind of files?" "Everything. Financial records, client databases, even his personal folders." But here's the strange part. They used a maintenance backdoor that the system says was installed months before Mr. David disappeared. A backdoor that should have been discovered and closed by now if the IT department was doing their job. Who else knew about this backdoor? That's just it. The system shows it was hidden so well that they only found it because someone was actively using it last night. Like whoever created it designed it to be almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. I was getting dressed before she finished talking. "Rebecca, I need you to check something for me. Can you tell what computer was used to access those files?" "Already did. The access came from a public library in Boulder. Someone who knew how to cover their tracks, but wanted us to know they were there." "Boulder. Close enough to be local, far enough to maintain distance. I met Rebecca at a coffee shop 3 blocks from David's office building. She looked nervous, which made 2 of us. "This is going to sound crazy," she said, sliding a printed report across the table. "But what if Mr. David set this up before he disappeared? Like insurance." It didn't sound crazy at all. It sounded exactly like something my paranoid son would do. "The access patterns are too specific," she continued. "Whoever got into those files knew exactly what they were looking for. They pulled contracts from the past 6 months, financial projections, and all the correspondence with those shell companies you asked me about. And they used a backdoor that only David would have known about? A backdoor that took our IT specialists 2 years to find, even when they knew someone was using it." I studied the report, pieces clicking into place. Someone with David's technical knowledge accessing exactly the information that would damage Sarah and Robert. "Rebecca, I need you to do something that might get you fired." She leaned forward. "What do you need?" "I want you to send an email to David's personal account, the one he used for family correspondence, not business." "What should I say?" I thought carefully. "Tell him his mother has been asking questions about the family business, and that someone's been watching the same files she's interested in." Rebecca nodded, understanding the implication. If David was out there, he would know I had found his evidence. If someone else was using his backdoor, they would know they weren't alone in their investigation. 3 days later, I received my answer. The email came from a generic account with a random string of numbers. No sender name, no signature, just 4 words that made my heart race. "The dead remember everything." I stared at those words for 20 minutes, reading them over and over until they burned into my memory. Was this David? Was this someone else using his investigation? Was this a threat or a promise? I wanted to respond immediately, to flood the anonymous account with questions and demands and desperation. Instead, I closed my laptop and walked around my house several times, thinking, if David was alive and hiding, there was a reason he couldn't contact me directly. If someone else was using his research, they might be just as dangerous as the people we were investigating. But if David was truly dead, then someone else knew about Sarah and Robert's crimes. Someone who had access to his passwords and his investigation. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with wine and a new understanding of my situation. I wasn't just investigating corporate fraud. I was dealing with people who had driven my son into exile or death while stealing his life and pretending to mourn him. The anonymous email changed everything. I was no longer operating alone, but I had no idea whether my unseen ally was friend or enemy. I composed a careful reply to the anonymous account. The living don't forget either. Some stories demand to be told. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. If David was watching, he would know I was ready to fight. If someone else was involved, they would know I wasn't backing down. Either way, ghosts don't send emails. Only the living need justice. Time to discover who was really pulling the strings. The next few weeks passed in a strange routine. I continued my performance as the grateful mother-in-law while secretly researching every detail David had mentioned in his video. Sarah and Robert seemed confident that their plan was working perfectly. They had no idea that their biggest threat wasn't law enforcement or business rivals, but a 63-year-old woman with unlimited time and a very personal motivation. I started receiving more anonymous emails, always brief, always cryptic. Check the Denver Post business section from last Tuesday. Robert's consulting firm filed incorporation papers in 3 states. Northwind Logistics has offices in places that don't exist. Someone was helping me connect dots I never would have found on my own. Following these digital breadcrumbs, I discovered that Robert's business empire was much larger than I had imagined. Shell companies within shell companies, all designed to move money through so many channels that tracking it became nearly impossible. But my anonymous correspondent seemed to know exactly where to look. The Cayman account numbers David mentioned are still active, read one email. Transactions happen every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. I started documenting everything in a notebook that I kept hidden in my bedroom safe alongside David's flash drive. Dates, amounts, company names, offshore accounts. A paper trail that was starting to look like evidence of something much bigger than simple embezzlement. Then Marcus called me. "Mrs. Thompson," his voice was shaky. "I've been thinking about our conversation." "About David." "What about David?" "I lied to you. About not knowing anything. The truth is, David gave me something before he disappeared. An envelope. He said to give it to you if anything happened to him." My hands started trembling. Do you still have it? Yes, but I'm scared. After you left, people started asking questions about me. Following me. I think they know David gave me something. Where are you now? I'm leaving town tonight. But I want to give you the envelope first. Can you meet me at the old truck stop on Highway 36? The one with the diner? I knew the place. A 24-hour restaurant that stayed busy enough to provide safety in numbers. When? 1 hour. Come alone and make sure nobody follows you. I drove to the truck stop, taking a route that would reveal any surveillance. The parking lot was full of 18-wheelers and late-night travelers, perfect cover for a clandestine meeting. Marcus was sitting in a corner booth, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He slid a manila envelope across the table as I sat down. David said you would know what to do with this, he said. He also said to tell you that he was sorry for getting you involved, but you were the only person he could trust. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were account numbers written in David's handwriting, contact information for 2 men I didn't recognize, and addresses for 3 storage units in different cities. What's in the storage units? Copies of everything. Financial records, recorded phone conversations, photographs of documents. David spent months preparing for this. He knew they were planning something. How did he know? Marcus glanced around nervously. He hired a private investigator to follow Sarah. Found out she was meeting regularly with people who definitely weren't business associates. When he confronted her about it, she admitted that her father was involved in what she called international consulting. Said it was too complicated for David to understand and too dangerous for him to interfere with. So he started documenting everything. Every meeting, every phone call, every suspicious transaction. He said if they wanted to play games with dangerous people, he was going to make sure there was evidence if things went wrong. Marcus stood up, leaving money on the table for coffee he hadn't touched. I'm driving to my sister's place in Oregon tonight. I suggest you be very careful with that information. These people don't hesitate to eliminate problems. He paused at the edge of the booth. Mrs. Thompson, I think David might still be alive. Some of the security footage from the office shows access to his computer after his supposed death. Either he's hiding somewhere, or someone else has his passwords. After Marcus left, I sat in my car in the truck stop parking lot, staring at the envelope and processing what he had told me. David had been planning for this scenario months before his disappearance. He had documented everything and created multiple backup plans. If he was alive, he was watching and waiting for the right moment to strike back. If he was dead, he had given me everything I needed to destroy the people who killed him. Either way, Sarah and Robert had made a fatal error in judgment. They had underestimated both David's paranoia and his mother's determination. I drove home and immediately visited the first storage unit address David had provided. Using the access code from his envelope, I opened a 10x10 space filled with file boxes, recording equipment, and a laptop computer. The laptop contained hundreds of files documenting Sarah and Robert's money laundering operation. Bank statements, wire transfer records, photographs of meetings with people who looked like they solved problems with violence rather than negotiation. But the most damaging evidence was a series of recorded phone conversations between Sarah and Robert discussing what they called the David problem. In crystal clear audio, I heard my daughter-in-law and her father planning my son's murder. He's becoming too curious, Sarah's voice said on one recording. Robert, we need a permanent solution. Accidents happen in bad weather, Robert replied. Especially on mountain roads. What if the accident doesn't work? Then we move to plan B. But it won't come to that. David trusts me completely. I sat in that storage unit listening to them plan my son's death, while discussing it like a business merger. Cold, calculated, completely without conscience. The recordings were dated 2 weeks before David's disappearance. But as I continued going through the files, I found something that changed everything. Security camera footage from David's office building showing him entering his office 3 days after his supposed death. Time-stamped, dated, indisputable proof that David Thompson was alive. My son hadn't died in any accident. He had staged his own disappearance after discovering that his wife and father-in-law were planning to kill him, which meant my anonymous email correspondent was probably David himself. I gathered copies of the most important evidence and locked the storage unit. Time to let my son know that his mother was ready to finish what he had started. That night, I sent a message to the anonymous email account. Found your insurance policy. Ready to collect on it. The truck stop meeting confirmed everything. The response came within an hour. 3 years was long enough to gather what we need. Time to remind them that dead men tell tales after all. The family reunion is next month. Perfect timing for a resurrection. David was alive, and he was coming home. 3 years. 3 years of watching Sarah perform the role of grieving widow while building an empire on my son's supposed grave. 3 years of Robert's sympathetic phone calls and helpful business guidance. 3 years of memorial dinners and anniversary remembrances and touching speeches about David's legacy. Tonight, the performance would end. The annual Thompson Family Foundation Gala was Sarah's creation. A way to honor David's memory while supporting causes he cared about, she claimed. In reality, it was a method to celebrate her success while appearing charitable for the cameras. I spent 2 hours preparing, choosing my outfit like armor for battle. Black dress, pearl necklace worth more than most people's monthly salary, and the diamond earrings David had given me for my 60th birthday. If this was going to be theater, I intended to dress for the occasion. The ballroom looked like a wedding reception, all white flowers and sparkling lights. Sarah had spared no expense on what amounted to a 3-year victory celebration. Elizabeth, she glided toward me in a gown that probably cost more than my car payment. You look absolutely beautiful. David would be so proud. I'm certain he would, I replied, kissing her cheek like we were dear friends instead of enemies. Robert worked the crowd like a seasoned politician, shaking hands and accepting condolences for a tragedy that had made him wealthy. He had gained weight over the past 3 years. Success apparently agreed with his appetite. I found my assigned seat near the front, surrounded by business associates and community leaders who had known David since college. They offered the usual sympathetic comments about time healing wounds and David's memory living on. If only they knew how literally accurate that was about to become. Sarah took the stage at 8:30, precisely on schedule. She delivered a speech about resilience and honoring the past while building the future. About how David's vision continued through every success his company achieved. Tonight we celebrate not just what was, but what endures, she said, raising her champagne glass. To David, who taught us that family means never abandoning each other. The irony was thick enough to cut with industrial equipment. That's when I saw him. He was standing near the service entrance, partially hidden by the catering staff. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Grief does that sometimes. But as the crowd shifted, I saw him more clearly. David, thinner, older, with a beard that changed his entire face and a scar on his left cheek that hadn't been there before. He was wearing a server's uniform, blending in with the catering crew. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and he shook his head slightly. Not yet. I watched him move through the crowd like he belonged there, invisible to everyone except me. He was positioning small devices near the stage. Recording equipment, I realized. He was documenting everything. When Sarah finished her speech and raised her champagne glass, I saw him touch his ear. He was wearing some kind of communication device. Then I understood. This wasn't impulse. This was coordination. Sorry to interrupt, he said, stepping forward just as Sarah proposed her toast. But I think there's been a mistake. The timing was perfect. Every phone in the room was already recording Sarah's speech. Now they would capture David's resurrection too. Sarah turned toward his voice, confused at first. Then recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the stage. "Hello, darling," David said, stepping closer but keeping his distance. Smart. Too many witnesses for violence, but close enough for the cameras. "Miss me?" The crowd began to murmur, confusion spreading through the ballroom. Some people recognized him. Others thought they were witnessing some kind of performance art. Robert had gone completely white, gripping his table like the earth was shifting beneath his feet. "You look surprised," David continued, addressing Robert now. "Did you think I wouldn't find my way home eventually?" I realized what he was doing. Every word was being recorded by dozens of phones. Every reaction from Sarah and Robert was being captured. This wasn't just a dramatic reveal. It was evidence gathering in real time. The silence stretched for another heartbeat before the room exploded into chaos. Cameras flashing, people shouting, security guards looking confused about whether they should arrest a dead man or the people who had stolen his life. I remained in my chair, watching the beautiful destruction with the satisfaction of someone who had waited 3 years for this moment. But as I looked at my son, alive, scarred, harder than the man who had disappeared, I realized I had no idea what he had become during those missing years. The David I had known was gentle, diplomatic, someone who resolved conflicts with conversation rather than confrontation. This man looked like he had learned different methods of problem solving. My son was home, but I wasn't entirely certain I knew who he was anymore. And judging by the look in his eyes as he stared at Sarah and Robert, that might be exactly what they deserved. David found me in the hotel bar 2 hours after the gala transformed into chaos. The ballroom had emptied like someone had announced a fire, leaving behind abandoned champagne and numerous uncomfortable questions. "Hello, Mom." I looked up from my wine to see my son standing there like he had returned from a business trip instead of the dead. He looked exhausted older, but alive in a way that made my chest tight with relief I couldn't yet express. "You're late for dinner," I said. "About 3 years late." He sat across from me and ordered whiskey, which was new. The David I remembered preferred beer and occasional wine. "I got delayed," he said. For 30 minutes, he told me a story that made every thriller novel seem like children's literature. The car accident had been real, but not accidental. Robert's associates had sabotaged his brakes on that mountain road, intending to make it look like he had lost control in severe weather. David had managed to escape before the car went over the edge, but barely. "2 men were waiting," he said, staring into his whiskey like it might contain answers. "Professional men, the kind who get paid to make problems disappear permanently." They had taken him to a warehouse in Utah where he spent 6 weeks blindfolded and restrained while Robert and Sarah told everyone he was dead. The plan was simple: wait for the insurance money to clear, then dispose of the only person who could expose their money laundering operation. "But they needed my passwords," David continued. "My access codes, client information, all the details that would make the transition look legitimate. So they kept me alive long enough to be useful." He had cooperated partially, providing bits of information while secretly planning escape. When they moved him to a second location, a cabin in Montana where he had more freedom but constant surveillance, he finally found his opportunity after 3 months. "I killed one of the guards," he said quietly, with a kitchen knife. I had never killed anyone before. The casual way he said it revealed more about the past 3 years than any detailed explanation could have. After that, it was over 2 years of staying invisible. False identity, cash jobs, sleeping in different places every few nights. I spent the first year just surviving, learning how to disappear completely. The second year, I started planning my return. "But you accessed your computer files," I said. "You got Rebecca to send that email." He smiled for the first time since sitting down. "Clever. I had been watching the company's systems for months, but I couldn't risk direct contact until I was certain you were investigating too." The anonymous emails. Insurance, he called it. He needed to know if I had found his evidence before he revealed himself. If I had stopped looking, he would have handled things differently. By differently, I suspected he meant more violently. "I've been watching Sarah and Robert for 2 years, he said, learning their routines, their contacts, their weaknesses. But I needed them to feel completely secure before I made my move. And tonight was their victory celebration. The perfect moment to remind them that dead men tell tales, but living ones can destroy everything they've built." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mom, for believing I was alive when everyone else accepted I was dead. For not giving up." I squeezed back, feeling the calluses on his hands that hadn't been there before. "Your room was never going anywhere, and neither was I." But looking at him now, I realized how much had changed. This wasn't the same person who had disappeared 3 years ago. This man had harder edges, colder calculations behind his eyes. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we finish what they started." "But Mom," he looked directly at me, "I need your help. I've been gathering evidence for 2 years, but it's scattered, hidden in different places. I need someone they trust to help me get close enough to collect everything we need for the FBI. They don't trust me. They think you're harmless." "That's different, but it's enough." His expression grew more serious. "This is going to be dangerous. Once they realize I'm alive, they'll try to eliminate both of us. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about 3 years of grief, rage, and careful planning. About watching Sarah profit from my son's supposed death while I played the grateful mother-in-law. "I've been preparing for 3 years, I said. David smiled, and for a moment, I saw the son I remembered beneath the scarred stranger. "Then let's remind them why they should have made sure I stayed dead." We had less than 24 hours before Robert and Sarah recovered from their shock and either fled the country or tried to eliminate the inconvenient resurrection of David Thompson. "They'll run," David said over breakfast in my kitchen the next morning. "Robert's too smart to try violence now that I'm public. What evidence do we still need?" He pulled out a notebook filled with 2 years of careful observations. Financial records proving the money laundering. Communication logs between Robert. He handed me a small recording device. I need you to get Robert to admit something, anything, about the kidnapping or money laundering. The moment he threatens you or confesses to a crime, the FBI moves in. And if he doesn't cooperate? David's expression grew harder. Then you leave immediately and call 911. I won't lose you too. An hour later, I was sitting in Robert's office playing the confused mother-in-law while he tried to appear normal despite having spent the morning destroying evidence. Elizabeth, I'm so sorry about last night, Robert said, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. That must have been such a shock. Shock doesn't begin to cover it, I replied truthfully. I'm still not entirely convinced I didn't hallucinate the whole thing. Grief can play terrible tricks on the mind. I watched him fidget with papers, checking his phone every few minutes. Through the window, I could see the van David had mentioned, along with what I now realized were unmarked police cars positioned strategically around the building. Robert, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. He went very still. Of course. Did you and Sarah know David was alive? What? No. How could we possibly know? Because if you did, and you let me grieve for 3 years while you knew he was alive somewhere. I let my voice break slightly. I don't know how I could forgive that. Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. I caught a glimpse of the screen. Documents secured. Leave now. Elizabeth, I think you should go home now. Why? What's wrong? He was already standing, moving toward his desk drawer. Nothing's wrong. I just think. That's when his computer chimed with an alert notification. Someone had accessed his system remotely. Robert lunged for his laptop, but I was closer. Without thinking, I grabbed the computer and held it against my chest. Give me that, Robert demanded, his mask of sympathy completely gone. Why? What's on here that you don't want me to see? Elizabeth, you don't understand what you're getting involved in. Then explain it to me. Robert opened his desk drawer and pulled out a gun. I stared at the weapon, my mind suddenly crystal clear. This wasn't grief counseling anymore. This was life and death. Put the computer down, Elizabeth. Or what? You'll shoot me in your office in broad daylight. If I have to. You don't understand. We had no choice. David was going to destroy everything we'd built. My recording device was capturing every word. So you had him kidnapped. We had him removed from the equation. He would have ruined us all. And you've been stealing from his company ever since. We've been protecting what should have been ours from the beginning. My phone rang. David's voice came through the speaker, calm and clear. That's enough confession for one day, Robert. FBI, you're clear to enter. Robert spun toward the phone, gun still pointed at me. David, his voice cracked. Where are you? Close enough to watch you threaten my mother. Close enough to record everything you just said. The office door burst open. 2 FBI agents entered with weapons drawn, followed by David and what appeared to be half the federal law enforcement apparatus. Robert dropped his gun like it was on fire. Robert Dalton, Agent Martinez announced. You're under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, kidnapping, and attempted murder. As they handcuffed him, Robert looked at me with something like respect. You never were harmless, were you, Elizabeth? Not even a little bit, I replied. David crossed the room and pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home after 3 years of being lost. Good work, Mom, he whispered. They got everything they need. Outside, I could see Sarah being arrested at her house, news crews already gathering to document the spectacular collapse of her stolen empire. Is it over? I asked. David smiled. The dangerous part is. The satisfying part is just beginning. He was right. Watching them get arrested was just the appetizer. The main course would be watching them lose everything they had stolen while the world learned exactly what they had done to my family. Justice, apparently, was best served with maximum publicity and no possibility of parole. The trials lasted 8 months. Robert received 25 years to life. Sarah got 20 years with possibility of parole in 18 years if she maintained good behavior. Given her track record, good behavior seemed optimistic. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a letter from Sarah in prison, seeking forgiveness and claiming she had found religion. I read it twice, then filed it in my kitchen trash can. Some betrayals are too complete to repair, and some people deserve exactly what they receive. 2 years after the trials ended, I was sitting in my new office on the 15th floor of the Thompson Foundation building, looking out at a city that had learned not to underestimate Elizabeth Thompson. At 68 years old, I had discovered that survival doesn't just make you stronger, it makes you useful. The Thompson Foundation for Missing Persons had grown from a one-woman operation to a nationally recognized organization that had helped locate over 200 missing persons and provided support to thousands of families dealing with suspicious disappearances. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the woman who had lost her son had become the person other families called when they needed someone found. David had remarried and was discussing children, which would make me a grandmother and complete the circle of renewal that had begun with his return from the dead. That evening, I drove home past the building that had once housed Robert's consulting business. It was now a coffee shop run by a retired teacher who made excellent pastries and knew nothing about money laundering. I finished my wine and studied my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman looking back had gray hair and laugh lines, and the kind of confidence that comes from surviving your own personal apocalypse. At 68 years old, I had a successful foundation, and my son was safely home where he belonged. What more could I ask for? The answer was nothing. After 5 years of building something meaningful from the wreckage of betrayal, I had everything that mattered. And if Sarah was watching the news from her prison cell, she would see that the family she had tried to destroy had not only survived but flourished. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. But sometimes the best revenge is living well while your enemies serve 20 to life in federal prison. I preferred the latter option.